Okay. Well, with that being said, I know people will hopefully trickle on. My name is Fred Jones. I'm the Senior Director of Public Policy and Advocacy at the Southern Education Foundation. Today, I'm joined by a number of colleagues here who are instrumental in the development of the Lynn Walker Huntley Social Justice Fellowship. We're joined by Raymond Pierce, the President and CEO of the Southern Education Foundation. We're also joined by Bacardi Jackson, the Interim Deputy Legal Director of the Children's Rights Division at the Southern Poverty Law Center. And we're also joined by our current Lynn Walker Huntley Social Justice Fellow, Harry Chiu. Today, we will hear brief remarks from my three colleagues here, and then we will be answering questions from you all about the fellowship and the application process. So with that, we can go to the next slide. But before we move forward, I wanted to give everyone a little more information about the Southern Education Foundation, which hosts the Lynn Walker Huntley Social Justice Fellowship. We are the longest standing education justice organization in the country. We're about 155 years old. We work through the birth through post-secondary continuum. We work in the early childhood education space, the K-12 education sector, and the post-secondary education sector. And we have 4 strategic areas: research and data, public policy and advocacy, which is the division that I lead, leadership development, and strategic initiatives. And our geography is across 17 states, all throughout the South. We have a pretty diverse definition of the South. It includes every state that had a formal system of enslavement, tying back to really the foundation of how our organization started, coming just after the Civil War. So with that grounding, I am going to now kick this over to Raymond Pierce, our President and CEO, to discuss how this foundation came about and the opportunity that it presents for recent law school graduates. Raymond?
Well, thank you, Mr. Jones. I really, really appreciate that. And I'm really glad to be a part of this webinar. I joined the Southern Education Foundation as president in January 2018. And I had a long time understanding of what the Southern Education Foundation was. And that was based upon me having been a civil rights attorney. Right out of law school, I practiced law as a civil rights attorney. And that's when I first was introduced to the Southern Education Foundation and its work and its unique role, particularly at that time, in school desegregation cases. And so when I became president of the organization, and I learned that the board of trustees of the organization had commissioned a fellowship to bring in a young attorney into the Southern Education Foundation to provide support for legal analysis, legal research, and just to be a person with legal training to assist the Southern Education Foundation in our very unique and quite frankly challenging mission of advancing education opportunity, particularly here in the South. So when I found out that this had been commissioned and that it hadn't been completed, I worked with a group of people to get some movement on this, and we eventually were able to raise the funds and get them completely endowed to have what is now the Lynn Walker Huntley Social Justice Fellowship, named after one of my predecessors, Lynn Walker Huntley. So I'm going to come back to that, but as Fred Jones just said, wants me to talk briefly about our history. For those of you who don't know, we are the oldest civil rights organization in education in the nation. We were born of a union between philanthropy from the North, largely philanthropy that had many philanthropic organizations that had supported the abolitionist movement prior to the Civil War and for the ending of the system of an institution of slavery, who after the war partnered with Black folks coming out of enslavement in the South. The number one charge for African Americans coming out of enslavement, if you know your history, was education, literacy, to learn how to read. So Black folks in Alabama and Georgia and Tennessee throughout the South quickly formed themselves. In fact, then they were called field schools, I think. And just with a piece of paper or a Bible or something to learn letters and learn reading, quickly got the attention philanthropy in the North, the Peabody Fund was the first, the Slater Fund out of Connecticut, the Jeans Fund, which is, got Quaker heritage up in Philadelphia, that put up several $1 million, which was big money back then, to build schools in the South, train teachers, and purchase books to send to the South to support and feed the thirst for the hunger for education for a population of people who had just been emancipated. Well, shortly after a while, those funds were eventually consolidated into what is now the Southern Education Foundation. That was done, I believe, in 1934. But prior to that time, the various philanthropies actually worked in concert together. A strategy largely building the Black teacher profession in the South, pushing for more taxation to raise money to support public schools, which was the first thing, and then protecting those funds. But of course, we know over time, those funds gave into segregation, concepts of segregation, and that's when the Southern Education Foundation got into the business of fighting the segregation of the system that we helped build, and joining the ranks of Thurgood Marshall, Jack Greenberg, and others, for the research component to prove the unconstitutionality of segregating those public funds and for public education. So that's a brief history. Of course, if you're as old as we are, you've got far more aspects of what you've done. We've done so much, but that's kind of a brief picture of what we do, what we've done. But the purpose of bringing an attorney through this fellowship program is not just to serve the Southern Education Foundation, and indeed we have immense needs, and we're thankful to be in partnership with the Southern Poverty Law Center in this fellowship. But there's a higher purpose, and that is to train young civil rights attorneys to address these issues of education. I'm glad to see Bacardi Jackson on the call. You'll hear from her soon. But there's far more work out there, and then we have attorneys who are trained and, quite frankly, interested in getting on the front lines what is becoming, sadly, an increasing movement that is unfavorable to education opportunity, not just in the South, but quite frankly, nationwide, I would submit. And so building a pipeline or strengthening the existing pipelines to get more attorneys into this is a major goal of this, to help inform our policies and our practices here at the Southern Education Foundation, to team up with our partners at the Southern Poverty Law Center in real litigation, pushing back on discriminatory policies and discriminatory actions, particularly against students of color and low-income students in the South. So this fellowship is critical, and I dare say, the Southern Education Foundation has become exceptionally busy here in the last few years. We've taken on quite a number of other projects. We are now the home of the federally funded Equity Assistance Center for the South, and to have a young fellow to assist us in research and analysis in that areas in terms of assisting school districts who are grappling with lingering school desegregation issues and issues of equity in education is critical. So there's a lot of work to be done. The person who holds the fellowship would not be bored, that's for sure. I see Harry Chiu was our current fellow. I'm sure he's going to get introduced. He's smiling at that. You're not going to be bored. There's more than enough work. Again, unfortunately, there's more than enough work. We just don't have enough workers in this. So we're proud to be a part of a larger effort, and those who remain interested in the advancement of civil rights and social justice, to have this fellowship. It was a long time coming. I'm exceptionally happy with the first year of this, but we're preparing for the next fellow, and I think that's the purpose of this fellowship. Now, I'd be remiss if I were not did not take time to give some information about how this program came to be named, and it's after Lynn Walker Huntley. Lynn Walker Huntley was a dynamite of a person. One of the first in many areas, first woman, first African-American woman in many areas. She was eventually the president of the Southern Education Foundation, first woman president of the Southern Education Foundation, but she held leadership roles at the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund and advanced critical litigation, I think on the employment side, that went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. In addition, she worked at the federal government at the Civil Rights Division for the United States Department of Justice, and she was one of the early persons of color in the foundation world at the Ford Foundation. So she brought many, many talents to the Southern Education Foundation. Sadly, she succumbed to illness, and I'm fortunate, and quite frankly, I say I'm blessed to be one of her successors here. And so the board, I think in great wisdom, decided to not only bring this position of this fellowship to the Southern Education Foundation, but to name it in honor of a woman of tremendous accomplishment, Lynn Walker Huntley, who I just believe did not live long enough to continue her talents on these very challenging areas. So that's a lot of what I had to say. I do want to say add that to go back to a little bit of the history of the Southern Education Foundation and putting it into context of what we're doing right now. I say to people a lot of times that the Southern Education Foundation has done so many things, and we're known for so many different things, because for so long we were the only game in town. And from the end of the Civil War up until the creation of the NAACP and later the Legal Defense Fund, then the Southern Poverty Law Center and other organizations, the ELC and the Urban League and things like that, for so long a period of time. This consolidated organization of foundations and philanthropic efforts in partnership with Black folks in the South to raise literacy, to create education opportunities, had to take on so many other challenges and needs. And of course, the challenge for us is to stay focused. And because the need is great, and we are staying focused. And this fellowship helps us to some degree. Again, through our partnership with the Southern Poverty Law Center, we look to overlap some of our areas in the South where there are specific areas in the South. And so that creates a map of several states: Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, and Mississippi is where our work is focused here for this fellowship, which is, again, the footprint of the Southern Poverty Law Center on these issues of education. So that's where we are in partnership. And perhaps Councilor Bacardi Jackson will speak a little bit further to that when she talks. But the challenges are not unknown. We are facing a mountain of issues in terms of the defunding of public education, I would call that, through the privatization of public education dollars. Huge issue for us. You can call that vouchers or whatever you want, but it has its roots in the defeat of segregation following Brown versus Board of Education, and just some cultures that just want to not desegregate. We are significantly involved in issues that came out of the pandemic. It wasn't even on my radar screen when I got here, but we all know the pandemic highlighted and, quite frankly, exacerbated some existing disparities in education opportunity. That's something that we have to focus on, and something that the fellow will get involved with. But we've got some new challenges now with some of these oppressive education policies coming out of the South, which want to limit what teachers could actually teach, particularly in areas of Black history and gender education issues. It's creating a bit of a challenge. So it's putting more work on our plate. But we're up for it. And the fellowship actually allows the Southern Education Foundation to play a role in that. And Harry Chiu might be able to talk a little bit about that when he has a chance. So I'm going to wrap this up by saying this: there is this is a great opportunity. I'm fortunate to have had a varied career, and I was once dean of a law school, and I enjoyed that time. But one of the roles, if you're a dean or a professor at a law school, is to advise students. Right? Students are always asking you questions. Dean Pierce, what about this? What about that? I used to get that all the time. I still get it. quite frankly, some of my former students. And I say this with no bias attached to it at all as president of the Southern Education Foundation and overseeing this fellowship. This fellowship is an outstanding opportunity for any law school graduate who has the slightest bit of interest in matters of social justice, within the realm of public education. If you have that interest, you will, and you're successful in competing for this fellowship, you will be on the front lines at the top, not just throughout the South, but nationwide on these issues. Nobody's ahead of us on these issues. Maybe alongside us, and we're alongside of other organizations that I've mentioned. But you know, we're in the front lines of this, and so the fellow would have a unique opportunity to get a high level of experience in a short period of time. So I would advise any student who's interested to put your best foot forward and apply for this fellowship, and because it is a tremendous opportunity, and it's a fun place to work, and given the depth and the expansiveness that the Southern Poverty Law Center has to offer to this, to be able to work with them, Bacardi Jackson, that team, and Margaret Wong, who's the president and CEO of the Southern Poverty Law Center. She and I talked a lot about this as I was always putting together, and her predecessor, Karen Baines Dunning, was on the board of the Southern Poverty Law Center. They were very helpful in the development of this fellowship. Again, it is a tremendous opportunity for a young law school graduate to get an exceptional level of skill in a short period of time. I've worked in the big law firms, top law firms in the nation twice, been dean of a law school. I run this organization now. I can tell you, you come out of law school, get a job with a big law firm somewhere, you make good money, you will not be on the front lines. you just will not be on the front lines. With this opportunity, you get to be on the front lines. And I think you understand what I mean by that. So that's all I have. I think I have time to say right now. There's so much more I could really brag about this, but I'm just so thankful that this has come together. It was a long time coming. It is doing so much, and I am now going to turn this over to our Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy, Mr. Fred Jones.
Great, thank you, Raymond. And just if it wasn't clear, this fellowship is in partnership with the Southern Poverty Law Center. So the fellow spends a number of his or her time at both organizations. We help ensure that the fellow has tangible policy and advocacy experience in partnership with the Southern Poverty Law Center. The fellow oftentimes will be able to get direct legal experience. And so Harry will be able to speak to that a little bit later, but I do want to just make sure we highlight the importance of our most critical partner in this, the Southern Poverty Law Center. And I will turn this over to Bacardi Jackson, who's the interim Deputy Legal Director of the Children's Rights Division at the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Thank you so much, Fred, and thank you, Raymond, as well. It's wonderful to be here, and we are very excited to be able to join in honoring the legacy of Lynn Walker Huntley. I didn't know her personally, but heard amazing things about her from people who did. So this is a wonderful tribute to her legacy, and hopefully the legacy, as Raymond mentioned, of building a bench. We definitely need a civil rights bench. And we have seen, sadly, a decline in the number of attorneys who are interested. So thank you for your interest. Thank you for being here today. We are excited about seeing your applications and also seeing you on the front lines in whatever form you show up on the front lines with us. We do hope this is a great pipeline for just getting people even interested in this work. I am, as everyone has mentioned, with the Southern Poverty Law Center. I work out of our Miami office. SPLC has been around since 1971 and has been a longstanding civil rights organization in the fight, primarily as a law center, but we also have other segments of our work which you may have heard about. One of them is Learning for Justice, which was previously Teaching Tolerance, providing resources for educators across the nation on how to teach hard history, a ton of resources that parents and teachers can access online. It's an amazing organization. If you haven't checked out any of those resources, I would urge you to. And we also have another prong that people are often familiar with, which used to be called Hate Watch, is now the Intelligence Project, where we actually trace and follow white supremacist activity. We produce an annual report, Year in Hate. And then, of course, the third prong of our work is the law part in the legal department. And we have 6 practice groups that focus on a number of areas, including voting rights, immigrant justice, economic justice, criminal justice reform, and I'm forgetting something, eradicating poverty. So we are focused in 6 areas, and then children's rights is the area that I have been honored to lead. So I'm going to share my screen to just delve in a little bit more about our children's rights work, so you will be more familiar with how we integrate into this fellowship. Can you all see that screen okay? Okay, great. All right, so this is we've actually done some retooling at SPLC, and we are kind of reclassifying ourselves. We're a democracy, a form of our democracy work to align with our impact goals. And democracy, of course, is impacted by education, which is the cornerstone of democracy. And our goal really is to try to have inclusive, high quality, free public schools and resources for children and families. You will see that we kind of put our work into a couple of buckets. The one that's on the left side is what I consider our sort of defensive strategy. We look to try to stop the criminalization and institutionalization of children, which is far too often the case in many of our schools. And then on the positive, affirmative, and proactive side is we're trying to build this equitable access to safe, supportive, inclusive, culturally responsive, well-resourced public education. And all of our states, all 50 of them, have constitutional provisions that allow for free public education. But of course, it's not a federal right. And of course, there's still a lot of inequities across those states and within those states, and particularly when it comes to the inequities that exist across racial lines and economic lines. So we know that the work in the public schools is a economic and racial justice issue. In the 5 states that Raymond mentioned that we work in, 1 in 3 of our students is below the poverty line. More than 1/2 of them are low income and eligible for free and reduced lunch. And 1 in 3 is Black. So we are really talking about racial and economic justice when we are talking about protecting public schools. We are busy. We have a lot of work, a lot of cases that fulfill these buckets of work. And we do our work in an integrated way. And so this is a perfect fellowship for the way that we hope to always show up. In every case that we bring, we know that the case and the litigation is but one tool. We know that in order to have lasting impact, to have the kind of impact that we think will actually move the needle, it can't just be winning a case. You've seen with the political swings, that case could be lost in the next year with an election cycle. So we know we have to do more than just win cases or bring cases. And oftentimes we're going to bring losing cases because we know our courts are not necessarily with us. But there might be an important precedent or important right that we need to just advocate for because we can't let this fight fall. And so we bring our cases also along with campaigns. And you'll see a list of cases, a list of campaigns, and our campaigns are broader. And we try to make sure for every single case we think about the policy implications. What are what legislation can we propose in our states federally? What can we do to push back on even local policies, as well as having an education and public relations component. We know we really have to create the community demand because our ultimate goal is to put ourselves out of business. We should not exist, we hope, in the next 50 years if we're doing our job. We should be creating the community demand and community capacity to be able to protect and advocate for the rights of all children, and so that we have this as just our baseline. So we focus on having a very strong component of policy work and community outreach work. To that end, we also publish a lot and we produce a lot of reports. So we try to make sure that we are constantly in the narrative that's being pushed out in the media, as well as being the experts when we walk into the offices of legislators. Just to hone in a little bit on 2 of those areas that we focus this fellowship on, which are the areas of pushing back against privatization and protecting public schools. A big part of that is fighting against vouchers. We know, and hopefully you all are aware of some of the literature around what's happening with vouchers. If you don't know, they started out as funding for segregation academies. That's their history. It was after Brown v. Board that people didn't want white children to go to school with Black children. And so the state said, we will fund you, family, give you state money so that we can continue to discriminate and keep these schools separate. And so that's the function that it has served historically. It's the function that it still serves. In addition to being racially segregative, it is also not accountable. It is not transparent. Oftentimes they don't meet the same standards. And in the state of Florida, where I live, they don't even have to meet the same building codes or have the same fire inspections. So it is a vastly different dual system of education, which is actually unconstitutional in many of our states. But it is a very hard case to win that, because our state constitutions are guarded by a 7-0 court against us here in Florida, and similar numbers in our other states as well. We launched with the Education Law Center and a private firm this initiative, Public Funds, Public Schools, which is still a big part of our work. A lot of our voucher cases we bring through the Public Funds, Public Schools initiative. In addition to cases, we also have this integrated advocacy approach through this initiative, and we host webinars. We have on here talking points. We have all kinds of resources for any advocates who want to be able to go into anyone's office to push back against vouchers. So it's that's a resource we're very proud of, that we've developed over the last 5 years, and that we continue to work with the Education Law Center and others on. And luckily, we've been able to do more of this work also with SEF as a result of this fellowship, deepening those bonds. One of our proudest cases that's a highlight in my career is that we beat Betsy DeVos in front of a Trump judge, and we were able to return $1.2 billion to the public schools that she was trying to siphon away and send into private schools. So this was just something I always throw in there because I love it. So a couple of the reports that we've done specifically around the privatization is this inequity in school funding, where we looked and found most of our states all 5 of our states are below the national average of funding per pupil per year. In Florida and Mississippi, we're about $4,000 below the national average. And meanwhile, we're still those states that are siphoning away the greatest amount in voucher schemes. In Florida this year, we just lost the whole cap on the income cap, and now we're looking at a $4 billion price tag for siphoning public coffers into privateers. So that's the sad state of affairs. We've also looked at these fiscal consequences. We had a researcher work with us on this report. So these are all very important pieces of information that we're constantly trying to keep in the dialogue. As was mentioned, we are also bringing litigation because we see that the privatization efforts are not standing in a vacuum. We know there is a broad attack on public education right now, and many people are trying to implode it from the inside out. And part of that implosion is what you've heard of as these culture wars, where we are seeing people attack schools on every possible front to lessen the level of public of how the public sees our public education, and how whether or not parents will believe in that these are the institutions that can educate their children. And so along with the expansion of vouchers, we've seen all kinds of attacks that started after George Floyd. We saw the whole hype around the mask mandates, and then came the anti-CRT work, and now is the anti-everything DEI, anti-history, anti-truth, and all of that is working to eviscerate and destabilize public education. And so we thought that that was another important component to include in this fellowship, is to help us in fighting back against these repressive laws. Right now, we are focused in Georgia and Florida on these particular cases. In Georgia, you may have heard of Katie Renderly, who was the teacher who read the book, My Shadow is Purple, who was fired, the first teacher fired in Georgia under these laws. We represent her, and we're developing litigation to push back against the laws, the Georgia censorship laws more broadly. We also are looking at this issue in Florida, and we're currently working in partnership with the ACLU and with Protect Democracy and Democracy Forward, and trying to develop some additional litigation to fight back against what's known as 1069, which was the expansion of both Don't Say Gay and Stop Woke. So we are doing our best. These laws were passed with a lot of diligence and trying to make sure that they could not be challenged. So we are having a challenging time trying to figure those out, but that's what has been so wonderful about having Harry on board. He is literally our resident expert on everything standing, on everything dealing with First Amendment. And it's been an amazing addition to our litigation teams to have someone of that incredible caliber to be able to join us and help us develop these theories. So the fellowship is hugely important for helping us move the needle as we are facing this onslaught of new challenges that we are seeing. Similar to these cases, we also still have one voucher case that's pending in Tennessee, and we're developing litigation in Mississippi around the inequities in funding in that state. So we expect that the fellow would be working on those cases as well. And with that, I will turn it over because I think I've overstayed my talk time, and welcome questions as we get to that portion.
Thank you, Bacardi, for just a wealth of information. And you can see that Harry was right in the middle of a lot of that work that Bacardi just presented as well. I wanted to just give Harry an opportunity to discuss some of the highlights of the fellowship thus far. As a reminder, this is a 2-year fellowship. So Harry started just after Labor Day last September, and will go through August of next year. And we're hoping to identify a new fellow starting in September 2024. So when Harry finishes, we will be able to take questions after we go over some of the program eligibility requirements. So Harry.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I've already been introduced. My name is Harry Chiu. I'm the current Lynn Walker Huntley Social Justice Fellow. I'll try to be quick. I know we're running a little over. I just wanted to round us out a bit by talking about how the first year on the fellowship has already been really, really exciting. I've already had the chance to make a real impact in the experiences of students of color and underserved populations. Just a few highlights. We were part of a coalition that defeated the legislation expanding school vouchers in Georgia this past session. I wrote policy briefs, met with legislators. It's kind of difficult to talk about how big of a win that was because basically every other proposed school voucher was passed in the South. As Bacardi mentioned earlier, I'm also part of the legal team representing Katie Rinderly, the first teacher fired in Georgia on censorship grounds. I'm sort of really deep in the team strategic thinking and considerations about where and what claims we can bring. Not to mention, last fall, I had the opportunity to share the stage with the president, Becky Pringle of the National Education Association, speaking to over 200 community members of a historically Black congregation to rally opposition against the erasure of Black history. The opportunities this fellowship provides are just really cool. There's no other way to put it. I'll also add that this fellowship is really unique in that it provides high quality mentorship in both litigation and policy advocacy. I'm deeply integrated with the children's rights team at SPLC. I meet weekly with my legal mentor, senior supervising attorney Mike Tefelsky, on legal research and writing, getting feedback. I'm part of all department meetings and SPLC retreats. Same deal with policy advocacy. Fred is a policy advocate with immense experience. We work really closely on advocating for pro-education justice policies, meeting with legislators at the state and the federal level. SCF's name recognition in this area means that we get to work with and advocate in front of really impactful policymakers, from state, House, and Senate leaders to staffers on the U.S. Senate Health Committee and officials from Department of Justice, Department of Education. Not only do you get to do a deep dive with this fellowship in both policy and litigation, you get to put integrated advocacy and community lawyering in actual practice. I mean, you're working with the community, you're litigating, and you're doing policy advocacy on every issue. So to finish, as a fellow, you'll be core to this incredibly exciting partnership between SCF and SPLC, these two historic, impactful racial justice organizations. And the fellowship already has, and I'm entirely confident will continue to make real advances in education justice for underserved students.
So I hope you all can see why we selected Harry. Not only is he quite articulate, he has just been a giant with us, and he's had a tremendous impact over this past year. And what he didn't go into detail about is how his writing, his advocacy really helped us fight back against the development of school vouchers in Georgia. And so Harry was instrumental to our advocacy and also our strategic planning. So we hope that as this fellowship grows and as we bring more people into this role, they will also get the same or even better opportunities. But I also want to take the moment just to say, Harry's been fantastic. And so I want to be able to open the floor up to questions, but I did want to just do a couple of housekeeping, just make a couple of housekeeping notes just to make sure folks know what we're looking for. So this fellowship is a 2-year fellowship. We're hoping to identify someone to sit in this role from September 2024 to August 2026. It's open to all 3Ls and recent law school graduates who've graduated or earned their JD in 2022 or 2023. You must have a GPA of 3.2 or higher, and a candidate must pass the bar exam in one of SCF 17 states, which are listed below. The fellow will be based in Atlanta, Georgia, which is where SCF is headquartered, and you have an annual salary of $90,000. It also does include a full benefits package as well. Go to the next slide. Now, some of the application process, our application opens September 1st and is open for a month to October 1st. You can click on the links here, or we'll send around this PowerPoint, but you can also find this information on our homepage. You'll have to submit your application along with short essays online. You will have to have supporting documentation in addition to the application, which includes a 5 to 7 page writing sample, your resume, the law school transcripts, and 3 letters of recommendation. We hope to notify our finalists in early November, and we're also hoping to make an offer by the end of November of this year. So that is sort of the immediate timeline that hopefully may answer some of your process questions. But if you guys have any questions, now would be the time to ask them. If you don't mind, if you do have questions, please use the raise a hand feature, or if your question is maybe more logistics in nature, feel free to also insert your question into the chat. So are there any questions? I see Emma Mansberg. Go ahead.
Hi, first of all, thank y'all so much. It's so great to hear about all of the amazing work going on in the South. And I know as public interest students, it's just exciting to see lawyers doing the work and know that that's on the horizon for us as well. But I'm really interested in how the Southern Education Fund and the Southern Poverty Law Center give the fellow opportunities for community engagement to ensure that in the litigation and in this legislation that y'all are advocating for, that the community's voices are represented, and making sure that the fellow gets the opportunity to do that and get client interaction.
Yeah, I can take this from SEF standpoint. So from a more of a public policy and advocacy standpoint, we work to identify what our public policy priorities are each year, and we do that through one, we try to understand what our own sort of priorities are, but we also try to listen to what's happening in the field, which includes community advocates, students, practitioners, educators, and our partners as well. So the fellow is a part of that process, though. When Harry came on board, we were already kind of through that process, but going forward, fellows will typically be included in the process of us collecting information to identify what our advocacy priorities will be going forward. And then they also have an opportunity to develop their own special project, which could include collecting more authentic community voice in where they want to share their interests in terms of executing on their legal/advocacy project. And I don't know if Bacardi, if you want to answer that on y'all's end.
Yeah, I'll jump in quickly. So we get our work from a lot of different sources. Sometimes it's from some of our grassroots community partners. Sometimes it's from people contacting us directly. A lot of times we get people contacting us directly. And also from some of the research work that we do in finding what the trends are as we are getting calls and as we are looking at the data. But I'll also just give Harry the floor to talk about that, because I think he can speak most cogently to the work that he's done to be on the ground as we've been, for instance, developing the censorship litigation.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I sort of referenced earlier, SPLC does a lot of community engagement when it comes to our impact litigation cases. I mean, frankly speaking, from a basic point of view, right? You need plaintiffs, and you also need to understand what the community actually needs from you. And I think, when I talked about speaking at the historically Black congregation, this was out in Albany, Georgia. Just seeing, this was a weeknight. There were 200 members of this church that turned out on a Thursday night to hear us talk about censorship, and more importantly, to share with us their views on what was going on in Lee County, what was going on in Albany County, how the different schools and the different racial makeup of the population, different politics of the administration really affected how the censorship laws are being enforced. All of that is deeply integral to our work.
I can also jump in quickly. I see there's a question about travel, and happy to just mention we do have some travel. As I mentioned, one of our cases is in Tennessee. We're working both in Georgia and Florida. We have been in community in both of those states, and Harry has joined us in those efforts in traveling to those places, as well as for our retreats and in-person meetings. We sometimes travel for that. So, and then legislative sessions are another opportunity for travel.
And on our end, there is some travel, which includes just being responsive to needs. So there was an opportunity for travel to Florida. There will be opportunities to travel to North Carolina. And there will be opportunities to travel to Tennessee. I would say from our standpoint, there's likely much more travel in the second year than the first year. We really want to make sure that the fellow feels comfortable and is grounded before he or she may go out into the, go to the state capitals or do any external meetings. But much more, I think, in year two. And Harry has done a significant amount of traveling thus far, and we expect more to come. Catherine, I think Blaylock.
Hi, yes, thank you. Thank you all so much for being on the call today. This has been immensely informative. I know someone said earlier that Harry was a part of some strategic planning. I was just wondering if anyone could reflect on the way that priorities may change in coming years, such that certain issues may characterize our, the fellowship from 2024 to 2026 that might look different than the work that's taking place now.
It's a great question. On our SAM front, we have really two main priorities. One is to focus on increasing school funding. We do this, we want to make sure that we're creating equitable school funding opportunities for students of color and low-income students. We're also what's also very important for us is to fight back against the development of school privatization. I don't see that those things changing under this fellowship. And I think our last priority is to make sure that we're advocating for a pro-truth public schools agenda, which includes being truthful about the way race and gender identity is taught in schools or are taught in schools. So, there may be other issues, but I think that those are the cornerstones of the fellowship.
Yeah, I think similarly for us, we have shifted our priorities as an organization. Our 4 goals are eradicating poverty, decriminalizing and decarcerating Black and brown people, pushing back against white supremacy and relegating it, and I'm forgetting the fourth. Well, it'll come to me. But within that framework, we are very much dedicated to ensuring that public funds are indeed in public schools, and that our public schools are able to serve and thrive students. And so for us, I don't see that necessarily shifting. And I think this privatization movement is very strong and afoot. But I think even more than privatization is this notion of dismantling public education. And so that can come in different forms. And we know there are political tides. While that could shift probably more readily on a federal level, I don't see that shifting that much in our states, unfortunately, because of the very deep gerrymandering that happens in our state legislatures. It's not very likely that will shift that much. I think that movement will continue.
Mr. Pierce, I wanted to bring you in to answer this part of the question as well. You mentioned that now SEF is the host site of the Equity Assistance Center. Maybe you can speak to the audience about the potential ways the fellow may be ingrained into that opportunity.
Sure, Fred. First, the Equity Assistance Center is a federally funded program that goes back to 1964. Quite frankly, the 1964 Civil Rights Act did a number of things. And one title of the 1964 Civil Rights Act was to create a fund of money, of federal dollars to assist school districts who were challenged with school desegregation. Keep in mind, 1964 is, like 10 years after the Brown v. Board of Education decision. And there was a great deal of school desegregation litigation going on throughout the country. There was no Department of Education at the time. It was the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. And so, in the wisdom of the federal government, pushed by organizations like the Southern Education Foundation and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund back at that time, and others who were, again, vanguards of the Black Civil Rights Movement, pushed for the creation of these funds to provide assistance to school districts struggling with these issues of school desegregation. At the time, for most of the time, they were known as desegregation assistance centers. The name was changed to Equity Assistance Centers, I believe, 10, 15 years ago. I didn't even know that the name had changed. When I was at the U.S. Department of Education, they were known as the Desegregation Assistance Centers. And they provided quality technical assistance to school districts on a number of issues. But by statute, the areas are race, national origin, sex, and religion. Those are the four areas of the Desegregation Assistance Centers, now known as the Equity Assistance Centers, to provide assistance, technical assistance, and guide school districts through some of these troubling challenges. Now, the federal government, Department of Education, manages those funds or places those funds out to organizations to manage these centers for them. And every 5 years, they send out a request for proposals for organizations that would be willing to take the money from the federal government that would be needed to manage these programs. And so we were urged to apply for it, and we did, and we won, and we got the grant. So for the next 5 years, the Equity Assistance Center for the South, there are 4 of them in the nation, is now being managed by the Southern Education Foundation. What is unique about that is that, as some of you may or may not know, this nation still has a large number of school districts that are in federal court to this day for school desegregation. Some of these cases are 30, 40 years old, or if not older. And where courts have yet to rule that the school districts are no longer in violation of constitutional law, federal law, in the operation of their school districts. Again, primarily segregated schools, systems of education. And the bulk, the 90% of those school district, those cases that are in federal court today, believe it or not, that today are in federal court, are in the South. That should come as no surprise. And the work of the Equity Assistance Center is not only to provide technical assistance upon requests from these school districts, but often that request comes from the federal government's Civil Rights Division at the United States Department of Justice. So it puts us in a unique position. It puts the fellow in a great position, and not only in work that Harry Chiu just described, but also to to assist the Southern Education Foundation in a relatively new operation we've taken on. We're finishing our first year. We've got 4 more years to go for the first cycle, and so it's a great opportunity to get involved in helping some of these school districts with some research-based models and practices to really improve school opportunity for schools, students in schools in the South, from student assignment, from resources, teacher diversity, discipline, disparities in how discipline is meted out. It's a variety of issues here. So it's another great opportunity. And Fred, I'm glad you reminded me to speak to that.
Any other questions? I think we maybe have time for 1 or 2 more.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. And this has been very, very informative. Unfortunately, I'm not an attorney, but I've done a lot of work, served on the school board for 18 years, and am now in the South Carolina State Legislature. And when I first saw this and the notice came to me, I missed my calling and not going to law school. But my question is, we have a lot of issues in the state of South Carolina. And as I look at the states that you are working in, and South Carolina is not included, my first question is the reason South Carolina is not. And then secondly, what opportunities are there? Because I do plan to share this information with some young attorneys that I do know.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that the fellow primary focus will be in the overlapping states between SCF and SPLC. And so the SCF states include South Carolina along with 16 other southern states. So our work definitely focuses on South Carolina as well as the 16 others, just in terms of our organization around policy advocacy, research, and the Equity Assistance Center that Mr. Pierce just spoke to. But for the fellow, we wanted to make sure that the overlapping states that SPLC's work is in, which I think are the 5 that Mr. Pierce listed earlier, that will be sort of the focus of the fellow's work, but it doesn't mean we won't be able to include specific issues from South Carolina should they fit. And also, this fellowship is open to anyone. So it's a national fellowship, but we think people who obviously have an interest in coming to the South, that has to be there, but anyone is eligible to apply.
Okay, thank you very much. And I apologize, I missed that portion because I looked on the website, it showed those 5 areas also and not South Carolina. So thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for that question. Historically, we started out just in Alabama and then have expanded slowly into the other 4 states that we're in currently. We actually are talking about possibly doing more work in South Carolina, in part because it's in the 4th Circuit and may afford us some winning opportunities for a change. So more to come, maybe. And, we've also been looking at Texas very seriously because of all the issues that overlap with our concerns. So yeah, we'll see. But so far, we're in these 5 states, and it doesn't mean we also do, through our public funds, public schools work. That's how we ended up doing work in Tennessee. We do some work nationally, and so sometimes we do have some voucher cases that come up in some of those other states.
Is it possible I can get your number, Bacardi, and call you later?
Oh, absolutely. I'll drop it in the chat for you.
Okay, thank you.
And we also are advancing our public policy priorities across the South, including South Carolina. So we've been in discussion with some of the members there as well. And so if we can do anything to help and assist.
Okay, well, I'll be the chair in 2 years of our Black Caucus, Legislative Black Caucus. So I dropped my number also, and I'd love for us to join partnership.
Great. Are there any other questions? Well, if not, we will come to a close. Feel free to reach out to us. The application information is on the main homepage of SCF's website. we have a general email there that we monitor daily, so we will be able to reach back out to you if you have any questions or concerns. But with that said, again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I especially want to thank Mr. Pierce, Bacardi, Harry, for showing up and providing your perspective. And yeah, we look forward to working with you all, and we hope that you all are able to apply in the future, or at least spread the word with some interested candidates. Take care and have a great rest of your day.
And thank you, everyone. And thank you for organizing this, Fred and Harry. Take care.